All right, good morning, everyone. Chatter, 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 chatter. For those of you that weren't here perhaps earlier this morning, I'm Brian Cobb, Chief Innovation Officer for the Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International Airport. I almost said regional. We're judged sometimes like that. That is a mouthful. I prefer to say CVG. So when you hear me say CVG, that's what we're referencing. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about the future of transportation with the question mark, what's next? Joining me today with on the esteemed panel is Dr. Shaaban Abdallah, President of Aerospace Engineering and Engineering Mechanics, University of Cincinnati. Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Kelly Cohen. And Doctor, thank you. For those of us that have been in aviation for many years, the hearing is starting to decline. I could hear Kelly quite well this morning. Thank you. Thea Walsh. Thea, good morning. Director of Transportation Systems and Funding, Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. And really cool stuff coming ahead of us. Mike Stanley, with founder and CEO of TransitX. I believe Mike is going to do a presentation during the lunch period. Is that correct? All right, Mike says yes. So seriously, if you can join us for lunch, you have got to see this product. It is pretty fantastic. Again, from the airport side, I'll kind of kick it off as far as future of transportation, what's next. If you saw really kind of the background and really the future of mobility, talks about Hyperloop, driverless vehicles, flying taxis, mobility as a service, and more. Where does the airport play in that space? Frankly, we're going to have to figure that out. As you will travel throughout airports in the U.S., definitely domestically, but internationally, airports are typically the beta environment, perfect test environment for bringing this technology into the fold. We are no different. Frankly, all airports in the U.S. are required to submit a 30-year master plan. We're in the midst of our master plan. If you can tell me what the future of aviation looks like for 30 years out, please join our team. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. But frankly, yeah, I know, Mike, I know. Calm down. It's coming. Frankly, what our interest and responsibility is what does the next 5 years look like? What does the next 10 years look like? And try to navigate in that general direction as best as we can. More so than ever, and I've been in aviation now for 25 years, both on the airline side and on the airport side, more so now than ever, we are seeing just a confluence of future technology like we have never seen before. And I think all of you in this room are experiencing the same thing in every one of your businesses. So how do we integrate that into society? Just as we were talking this morning, this connectivity, the mobility, the cybersecurity, all of those implications. And again, for our responsibility on the airport side is really to be that good neighbor, to try to bring those products to service. And certainly integrate them into society as best as we can. So with that said, we will flip it over to our esteemed panel. Thea, I'm looking at you first. And can everyone hear Thea? And actually, I think we'll do this. Mr. AV guy, I'm going to use the second microphone.
Thanks, Brian.
So Thea, on the really, I think you're probably, out of all of us, the closest on the governmental regulation side of the house. Where do you see government stepping in or stepping aside as far as regulatory needs for these mobility, advanced transportation modes?
Well, I think right now there's certainly a lot of conversation in that realm. When it comes to Hyperloop, for instance, we have a group of states that are actually working together that have interest in Hyperloop, that are kind of talking about making sure standards are in place, and then also reporting that into the federal US DOT. I can say at this point in time with our engagement, we're not hearing a lot out of the US DOT. So it's more kind of being state-led. And the concerns about this innovation, because innovation is happening on the ground, and we're actually seeing that happen, say, with even, connected vehicles, where a lot of that stuff is happening at the state and local level, and then that's being tweaked back to the USDOT. They just, not to say anything negative, but they're not able to keep up with all the different technologies. And so real-time testing and real-time opportunities are going to be the things that ultimately lead to those regulations and the more federal oversight opportunities.
So as you mentioned, the real-time testing, and frankly, I'll use the term, and then you correct me or add in. Is it almost kind of like that Uber environment where innovation is just going to continue to press forward, press forward, press forward until someone says no?
Right. I mean, that's clearly what's going on here, is that the private side of technology is ready to go, and there's not going to be a lot of things that are going to hold them back, right? And it's going to continue until it becomes like a regular practice, and then at that point, there's regulations built around it, or at least that's how I envision it.
And I think one of the first ones that has encountered regulation of late is drone technology. And Dr. Cohen, if you can field drones and essentially how quickly they've come into the marketplace, everything from the commercial use all the way down to personal self-interest, and what the implications could be for drones of the future.
Good morning, everyone. A couple of years ago, I was at this UTM conference at NASA Ames, and at that time, the prevailing joke was, if you wanted to fly a Frisbee, you'd probably need a certification from the FAA. A lot has changed since. Right now, we're employing drones operationally to monitor traffic, bridge monitoring, construction, site monitoring, and we see that go and advance into the future. You want to commute from CVG downtown, take an air taxi, unmanned. The technology is available. We need to work out the kinks. We need to have a better unmanned traffic management system. But it is there. It is not unfeasible. The materials, the capability, and the affordability. So if I look at the future, I see unmanned systems moving people, moving goods. I see them be able to take information, providing added security for our community, added safety, our ability to respond quicker when bad things happen, man-made disasters or natural disasters. And there's a wide range of possibilities that are possible. If any of you would send an email to kelly.cohen@uc.edu, I'll give you a state-of-the-art report of what the University of Cincinnati is doing in a wide range of applications for UAVs. We just send that report to the Vice Chancellor for the Chancellor of Higher Education, State of Ohio. So it's there. You get a very good insight into what we are doing now, into the future. The future is up in the air, literally. Thank you.
Literally. Nice. As an airport guy, I love that. And that was one heck of a sexy plug for your report. I gotta say. Who is involved in drone technology in the room? Anyone? All right. The good doctor from UC as well. Awesome. Seriously, if you follow drone activity at all, it is one of the fastest growing marketplaces in the world right now. People can't embrace drone technology fast enough. The concerning aspect is there are other things up in the air, such as aircraft, that have to navigate around those drones. So to Thea's point, drone technology was one of the first quickly issued legislated items from, frankly, the FAA, what they were trying to do. And essentially, they were caught blindsided and flat-footed, and admittedly so, and said, look, we weren't prepared to keep pace with what's happening with this technology. So the best that we're going to do is really kind of push it back to the local control towers and the airports to say, well, we'll just limit activity around a 5-mile radius. And then very quickly, the questions became, well, wait a minute, how do we do that, and what's the method by which we would do it? So an app came along with that. And then the next iteration was, and frankly, credit to our region, CVG was the first airport in the nation to actually diminish and get rid of the 5-mile radius for those individuals that are interested in flying their own drone. We didn't want to be responsible for controlling that activity as long as it's not in the way and conflicts with the runway patterns. So you actually see Kentucky legislation that supports CVG's initiative. Now that's being picked up and pushed throughout the U.S. federal legislation, ideally within the next year. So very cool things are happening within our region. And then we'll shift gears over to Hyperloop. Hyperloop seems like a million miles away, but it goes incredibly fast. So Dr. Abdallah, just kind of walk us through what Hyperloop is, if you would, and what's the reality of it coming to us?
Okay. Actually, he's up in the air. We are on the ground and underground. So Hyperloop is the concept is to travel in a tube that has no air, and we evacuate the air, and then we levitate the pod above the ground, so we have no resistance whatsoever. So all you need is an initial push or initial momentum to drive the vehicle. We can reach up to 760 miles an hour. And actually, Elon Musk, SpaceX is trying to push that to supersonic speed, which in vacuum we can do it. Just the passengers probably, it would be a problem. So now I see the development of Hyperloop is taking place overseas. I was just in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and actually my students and I, we received the International Award for an Innovation from Dubai. The king gave us the award and a nice check. And so they are already started building a track of 140 miles. And now I just found out Saudi Arabia is having a deal with SpaceX to build a Hyperloop from east to west of Saudi Arabia and make a connection with Dubai. There is Hyperloop being built in India and Canada. And even now, there is companies like HTT, Hyperloop Transport Technologies, a French-based company. And so it's being developed, you know, outside the United States, but also inside the United States. But I think one of the comments I heard from people working on these projects, they told me, you go to Dubai and there is one guy who says, go, the king says, go, you go. In the US, you have so many layers of regulations and bureaucracy. So definitely this will be developed outside. Now, I can see in about 10 years, we can see probably passengers, but not before that. I see cargo. Cargo definitely is a near possibility. We at the UC, we wrote a proposal for National Science Foundation to build a low-speed Hyperloop to check our induction motors, and our deal is for hopefully carrying packages with reasonable speeds, because we are not going to evacuate the tubes because it's too expensive for a small distance. So we are just going to run low speeds, and then we're going to build another Hyperloop for high speed in UC East. So hopefully we get that money. $2.5 million will definitely help us develop these two projects. So I would say in 5 years we'll see Hyperloops for cargo. In about 10 years we'll see some brave people getting in Hyperloop today.
Hopefully getting out too.
So you're saying there's a chance. Really, we owe a round of applause to Dr. Abdallah. If you're not aware, there was a call for designs, and correct me if I misspeak, Doctor, but Dr. Abdallah's design is one of the leading designs in the world, which is why he is traveling the world to share the good news story, and it's right here in UC, right in our region, and the best and the brightest, again, amongst all of this panel, but certainly with the good doctor leading the way on Hyperloop. Our selfish interest in Dr. Abdallah and I met some time ago, along with Thea and some other great colleagues, to talk about and socialize. If you picked up on the themes that I shared earlier today, specifically around the airport growth, that growth could very well outpace our traditional infrastructure as far as roadways. If you think about the freight implications on two major global air hubs being located at one particular airport, we have got to start thinking about alternative advanced transportation modes, and something like Hyperloop could certainly deliver that right to the airport space. If you think about all of those off-site warehouses that are really kind of gauged to pick that package up, put it in a truck in today's environment, truck it over to the airport, unpack it again, sort it again, and then pack it and put it on an aircraft, there's several steps that could be eliminated rather rapidly with something like Hyperloop that, if you think about the pod, that could just be loaded on the aircraft and off it goes. So the potential is certainly real. So let's shift gears. We talked about drones in the air. We talked about Hyperloop on the ground. Let's talk about an elevated roadway, if that's fair. And I think Mike, he's already squinting at me. Walk us through TransitX, Mike.
Well, let me instead, I think if you understand something about transportation, that transportation, I think, is fundamentally broken right now. And it's fundamentally broken because it's slow, either through the congestion or through mass transit, which requires multiple stops. People can't get reliably to where they need to go. If you look at the financials, it costs too much to build roadways, to build railways, that there's a poor safety record. We're killing 40,000 just in the United States and many overseas, and it's not resilient, right? So these are some fundamental things that say it's broken in lots of ways, and there's no great solution that is seen there. You can say, well, the cars are the dominant mode, right? If you look at the vehicle miles traveled for cars, you're looking at 90-95%, right? So why do cars dominate? Is because it's the network, stupid, right? You have a road network, and it brings you to every place that you have. And so how do you kind of break this dominance? Because we don't really like, to be honest, nobody likes buses and trains, right? You have to wait for them, they're crowded, there's all these issues with existing modes. Now the solution, and what you've heard down here, is multimodal, right? Let's have everyone choice. It's like, nobody wakes up in the morning and says, man, I wish I could take multiple modes to work because I really like switching those modes, right? No, people don't say that. You want to get in your car and you want to have that personal experience, but you just don't want to stop and you don't want to have congestion, but you like the ability to leave when you want to. And so there's these fundamental assumptions, though, that everyone's making is roadways are here to stay. We have so much infrastructure. You see it everywhere. It's dominant. You can't displace roads. Or can you? Right? And so what would it look like? Because if you look at what I'll call the alt roads, so the alt roads would be sort of monorails, gondolas, Hyperloop, flying cars, all of these. But they haven't ever worked, and maybe they won't, because you need to have several things. You need to have high capacity to be able to do the mass transit. You need to have low cost, so you need to have something that's less expensive than even the roadways. There's very little funding even for the existing roadways. So how are you going to get funding for a new transportation mode? And you can't scale, and you lack the network effects, which is what roads allow you to do. So the question is, can you do that? And so TransitX is doing a new mass transit system. So it gives you what you love about cars. And so it puts you in an elevated system or underground. But the idea is that these are 100-pound vehicles that can displace the car infrastructure. And so our track is lower cost than roads. And when you make it low cost and you give people what they love about personal vehicles, that means you can have a very rapid replacement cycle because we can be privately financed. We aren't dependent upon public funding. So when we go to a city, we'll say, look, we will finance an entire car-free city. And we can have this operational and replace and have a sparse road network that can cover your entire area within a few years. Because you can use mass, so you have the financing, you have the technology. It's basically electric vehicles. So they're autonomous electric vehicles that weigh 100 pounds. They're battery powered. The base technology is very simple. We know that wheels on a road, on a steel track, work. right? We're pretty confident of that. And it's just the control system that allows you to have the capacity. So one of our tracks is the equivalent of a 12-lane highway. So now imagine you're building a 12-lane highway for the less cost than it would be to maintain an existing roadway. So just like you have solar plants and solar farms replacing coal, and not necessarily because it's cleaner, but you look at the economics. Always follow the money. What's going to win is the economics. So if you have flying vehicles that have to generate lift with energy and have the sound associated with that energy, if you look at a fast speed system that you have, because we already have a high speed 500 mile an hour interconnect across the entire world, right? It's called the airline network, right? And that it gives you from point to point around, that's already existing. We already have that. Now what you need is the distribution network to be able to take you from those airports and be able to distribute it and do the short. So we can go 150 miles an hour between cities. We do 45 miles an hour nonstop within the city. And it's the cost, it's the capacity, and it's the convenience to give people what they love about cars without any of the negative side effects, and to give people what they love about a network of mass transit without any of the negative side effects of switching. So that's what TransitX is doing. We have 12 projects that are starting. We have 120 cities that want to be second once we show our demonstration. Our demonstration will be the end of this year. We're going to have our first deployments in the Philippines next year, India, Malaysia, and the United States in the Boston area. So watch out. It's coming, and it's coming very fast, and nobody's expecting it. So they think it's autonomous vehicles, and they think it's electric, and they think it's shared fleets. That is all true. It's just not going to be on the roadways.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. So yeah, the future is certainly on the horizon. I think one of the conversations that I had with Mike's colleagues was, and I'm dating myself, we're at that pinnacle point where is it Betamax or is it VHS? And we don't want to be left behind. So very quickly, we're looking at opportunities and scenarios with advanced transportation of which one is going to be that VHS that's going to carry us onto the CD, et cetera, et cetera. So let's float back to Thea if we can. Thea, how's the Planning Commission supporting really kind of like a kid in a candy store, all of these different advanced transportation options? How do you even begin to pick? So how are you facilitating, and really what do you need from the community?
Well, I think the most important thing we need from the community is to hear what they want to do. Right? Listen to our member partners, which a regional planning commission is kind of like a chamber of commerce for governments, right? So really listening to what their citizens need and thinking about what will help economic development, and what will improve the market, and what kind of things will make us safer, right? And being able to support that, educate around it. We've actually started something known as a Smart Region Task Force, and I was going to share that a little bit in the planning section, but that we, over the next 2 years, we're actually kind of realigning and working with, because in Columbus, if you're not smart Columbus, then what am I going to do, right? And so a lot of our smaller governments and counties say, well, where do I play in this? And we're actually giving them a voice and having them come to the table, learn about the opportunities that are going to be out there for them, and also understand what are the pitfalls, where am I going to be taken off my path? Because I will say, in this world that we're in now, you get a lot of private vendors calling you, trying to sell you their next technology. And if you're not very savvy about these things, or if this is just new to you, you're going to say, oh, that sounds great, sign me up. And the next thing you know, there's a bunch of cell devices all over your city, right? So that you didn't want. So I think it's really important that you take the time to be able to get educated about it. But it is moving fast, so having kind of a dedicated resource, and that's where MORPC comes into play, and I'm sure that's where OKI comes into play in Cincinnati.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Thea. Dr. Cohen, we're going to flip it to you. So take that crystal ball of yours. Where do you see the future of transportation, and how is the region going to facilitate that? So almost like, what's the headline going to say about this region as far as advanced transportation?
Looking into the future is always challenging, but what I've seen with drones, working with them from 1990, they have made a huge impact. If you look at the impact they've made in the military, at first people thought there was just some toys, and then the other thing is, oh, nobody can replace our fighter pilots. About a year and a half ago, we demonstrated to the Air Force that our AI could beat fighter pilots in combat simulation, even though their vehicle was far less capable. So when you take augmented reality, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, add them all to the new vehicle technology that is developing, automated. We've done 100 flight tests just in the last year, automated takeoff, landing, waypoints. We showed that we can move cargo from place A to place B, given what we have, and the scalability is not a problem. Now, given that, what I can see is geofencing certain tunnels in the air. You do not need actual tunnels. We are talking about electrical vehicles that are relatively quiet. They can go up, not just about 100 feet, but 300, 400 feet, and you could have them move in certain areas whereby they do not constitute a hazard to the community. Right now, we can fly UAVs certified not very far from traffic. It would have been impossible to conceive just about 3 years ago. We do that, and we do that very safely. We could have these corridors in the air because now you just don't have, you're not limited to the second dimension. We can geofence aircraft to a great deal of accuracy and get them moving in those corridors, and come up with a air traffic management system that could track collaborating vehicles in the air, and also isolate with ground-based radars those that are malicious or aircraft that may have some trouble. So I do see us coming up with those capabilities. Now, the trick is, how do I make this affordable? How do I make this safety, I think, is something that we can demonstrate. And how do I integrate this with the National Air Traffic Management? Those considerations are things that can be worked on, but I do see that evolving. The way I've seen UAVs evolve from 1990 till where we are right now, I see in my lifetime, I hope I live there, but that over the next 20 years, we'd be able to demonstrate such a capability in which we restrict these airflow, the flow of air traffic. And now you can have a whole network capable of moving goods, moving people, being able to provide us safer cities and smarter connected cities.
Awesome. Safety, speed, efficiency, and experience, which brings it back to us as a community. And what are we looking for? So we'll flip it open. Time for you to share your thoughts and questions. Oh my gosh. Dr. Jonathan Corey, ladies and gentlemen. For some housekeeping, I'll run back to you. If you have a question, raise your hand and we'll hand the mic over.
This one's primarily for Thea.
Thank you.
So the question I've got is, what do you see as the evolution of the regulatory environment going from today, when it's basically every state doing their own individual jobs and then coming back to the feds, versus in a couple of years, once some of these systems, for example, if TransitX is deployed or Hyperloop is deployed in larger installations, the feds are going to come in and regulate it, presumably. How do you see that transition working out?
Well, I feel like it's very much a kind of a back and forth, like Brian actually described with the FAA with drones. I could see that, and actually we see that happen with roadway and like the MUTCD manual for the signalization and road signage today, where a state or community kind of comes up with a standard, and then that's kind of going up through that research arm. Then it kind of makes its way into the national federal policy or the national guidebook for that. And then as things get improved, it kind of like comes back up again. So I feel like it's a cycle. And so when you introduce a new technology, you're just creating a new cycle for a new technology.
Awesome. Next question.
Mr. Stanley, does your innovation include the transportation of goods or just people?
Yeah, it's both for goods and ton pallets. So you don't need trucks anymore because most of your trucking is transporting pallets. So as long as you can transport a pallet, then you limit the need, so you get to unpack a 40-foot shipping container, put them on pods, and have them distribute across a nationwide network or even a local regional. And you can also do individual deliveries, so that way when the pod door opens, you have an arm that's basically giving you your packages to take home. So that's how you do door-to-door, is that I know when you're arriving, I know what packages are yours, and so you can do both individual package delivery as well as palletized packages. And both water, recycling, trash pickup, delivery, essentially all the things that use your emergency response, your ambulatory, your health. So there's many different options for being able to do everything that you're now doing on the road.
So Mike, while you're standing up, you just mentioned ambulatory and really purpose-driven design. What are you doing to integrate the needs for the disabilities community?
Yeah, so we look at sort of, mental, physical, so all these disabilities. So one is that you can have, anytime you have a single mode, it's better for those that are disabled because you don't have as many transfer points, and those are the things that really are difficult to manage. So by the pods coming down, because the pods elevate to go down, you essentially are having an at-grade just roll-on, roll-off. So for the physically disabled, you're basically just rolling on with strollers or a wheelchair. And then because it's a cell phone driven, if you're blind, you're just going to go to the station and you'll just be able to sit down and it just takes you to your destination because it's using your Bluetooth unique signal from your cell phone to determine who you are, your authentication mechanisms, and where your likely destination is that you could also select with your own personal cell phone. So now you don't have to read signs, you don't have to listen to audible messages that are coming over the speaker. Everything is personally given to. And so I think, and even for the mentally challenged, so an Alzheimer's patient could be transported with a custody. So you have a custody transfer because if you have a 3-year-old that needs to get to daycare, put them on a pod. You can guarantee that it's going to arrive only in one location, and the teacher that has been designated as the recipient is the only one that can open up that door to get that child out, or an Alzheimer's patient. So all cross spectrums, I think this is a real opportunity to make it where it's an equitable, accessible mode that just can't be done in any other way.
Thanks, Mike, and that's huge. I think it's all of our social responsibility, right, to be advocates for the disabled community. So building that into your network is tremendous. So credit to you, at least driving that conversation forward. Other questions?
I have a question for Dr. Abdallah. Where do you see Hyperloop coming to the U.S. first? I think ideally it's probably going to happen overseas first, but where do you see it happening in the U.S.?
It's happening in the U.S. at the same time, but the rate of development of the Hyperloop overseas is faster because the regulations, they don't have basic regulations. Just the king says go, it goes. And but there are about 10 sites, I think, in the U.S. have been approved or in the process of.
So,
yeah.
I can expand upon that. So we, in Central Ohio, we have a corridor that competed in an international challenge for Virgin Hyperloop 1. And there's actually 10 winning corridors around the world, and ours is one of 4 in the U.S. And so those 4 locations in the U.S. will likely be one of the places you'll see it in the U.S. first. Our corridor is a Chicago, Columbus, Pittsburgh corridor. There's a Denver Front Range corridor, a Miami to Orlando corridor, and a Texas Triangle, Houston, Austin, Dallas. So those are the kind of 4 areas where you're going to see, at least for that company. Now, keep in mind, there's at least 5 companies in this space, but that one, they already have a test facility. They're working out in the Nevada desert, so they're physically on the ground in the U.S. Working at it, and we're really excited to bring it to Ohio.
And Dr. Abdallah, since you have the microphone, you are surrounded by some of the best and brightest talent in tech in this room and around this region. What is it that you need from this community to support your efforts? What industries do you see engaged in Hyperloop to bring it to reality?
Excuse me, that's a very good question. Actually, we need support from the community, number one. The community have to accept and believe the Hyperloop is the 5th mode of transportation. Is coming no matter what, because and it's going to change our lives and the way we live. Because I give you a simple example. If you take a trip from Cincinnati to Chicago, you can start at 9:30 in Cincinnati. You get to Chicago at 9. So you can live in one state and work in another state and get up late in Cincinnati, get to work on time. So the difference in time zones, you know. So I think the community is number one. We need their support, and we did get a lot of support from the local industry in Ohio when we built our pod, and so then the manufacturing industry is our second industry that we really need their support for manufacturing. Up till today, we don't know what the SpaceX used to build their 1 mile tunnel. We don't know the materials they used. Luckily, we got an award from SpaceX, a piece of that tube. So we're going to analyze that piece and find out what SpaceX is using, because the most expensive part of Hyperloop is the tube, and the way you evacuate the air, and it took SpaceX 45 minutes to evacuate 1 mile tube, and then 45 minutes to reintroduce the air, and for really thousands of miles that it will be. Hopefully, we're going to use solar energy to operate that tunnel, and we think that this will be cost effective. And I just want to mention one thing, so Mike will not be upset with me. The Hyperloop is long distances between states, very far distances, because speeding up and slow and stopping, the acceleration is a problem. And of course, we're going to go in straight lines for the time being. Going in curves will be another issue that needs to be developed. But let's just go for a straight line and starting and stopping. Stopping is the biggest problem we have because of the heat we generate. So we're looking at many advanced ways of doing that. So I think in the future we will be able to utilize all types of industry to help us build the Hyperloop.
Perfect. I think you all heard your call to order. That was the quickest 45 minutes that I've had in quite some time. So fascinating technology for those of us that used to read Popular Mechanics back in the day or watch the Jetsons. The future is here. So let's wrap our head around it, and then also let's congratulate our panel. And Dr. Abdallah and Mike Stanley will be here throughout the day. If you have questions and didn't have a chance to ask, certainly approach them. They're all very approachable individuals. Chat it up, and let's go build beautiful things. Thanks, everyone.